I've heard your pleas, your wants, your opinions, your comments. I've read them on the most recent video on trans issues, especially in the UK, bruv. I've learned a whole bunch about things that I did not speak about in that video, and I did see this, I think before I made that video, but it must have slipped my mind or something. The EU nations specifically, which, you know, in this case the UK isn't, luckily for them, must recognize legal gender changes across the bloc top court rules. So this came out on October 4th, 2024, and luckily for the UK, they're not in the EU, and that, you know, maybe that was a happy accident on their part. I don't know that they actually wanted to do Brexit. For this specific case, you know, it probably did sweeten the deal a little bit. This is, you know, obviously Brexit happened before this as well. Given the recent EHRC guidance in the UK about how essentially anybody potentially suspected of being trans is allowed to be disallowed by a public or private entity in their use of so-called single-sex spaces like bathrooms, even though apparently with the artist render that I drew in MS Paint literally for the video last time, this one right here, this is apparently how most bathrooms are set up, or toilets they would call them, are set up in the UK, where you do have a bunch of closed off rooms that are essentially cubicles with a little lobby that is sinks. At this point, like, you don't really need it to be gender segregated because the only privacy you get is with it behind a locked door that nobody can see into. It's obviously easier to make the privacy concern or whatever if the group of stalls is behind a door like in America, and each of the stalls allows for like 18 fucking miles of room underneath, above, on the sides in order to be able to see if there's any homeless people in there so you can send them to your local fucking prison facility to be used for slave labor or whatever. Like, that's part of the reason why US bathrooms are so absurd and why public restrooms, generally speaking, are existing less and less. It's because instead of actually doing something materially to house homeless people, like building affordable housing, decommodifying housing, making it so that it's no longer a speculative asset for parasitic fucking leeches to landlord over, and instead giving the dignity to human beings, being able to fulfill the one of several needs they have: food, water, shelter, socialization. Instead of doing that, you know, they make it so that you feel less safe in any public restroom that exists because the stalls need 18 viewing inches on either side of them rather than having cubicles like this, and also why there are no benches anymore. Any public areas in, you know, your local area are destitute because any kind of accommodations that would help people, you know, more comfortably exist in those areas have been removed so that homeless people can't use them, and therefore they are less likely to be there. So the people that either don't understand why homelessness happens or just are sociopathic to the point where they hate homeless people and want them to suffer, they don't have to see them anymore, right? Anyway, apparently this is how they look, so there's literally no reason in the UK to really have gendered bathrooms to begin with, but you know, I digress. If they were in the EU, they would have to recognize legal gender changes and a variety of the other, you know, guidances that the EHRC might put out that could potentially go into law, given the current Labour government under Keir Starmer are in support of them, would have a little bit more difficulty, a little bit more pushback. In London, the European Union's top court ruled Friday that member states must recognize legal changes to gender identity processed elsewhere within the EU, in a case with far-reaching implications for transgender people across Europe. So an example, if you were in the UK and the UK was still part of the EU, the UK didn't allow you to have a legal change of your gender identity or whatever, or if you moved to the UK from an area that did allow you to change your gender identity on your government papers, this court ruling would essentially force the UK to have to respect the fact that the gender identity changes were made, or whatever they exist as, even if they haven't been changed. Obviously, any EU nation has to follow this, which is pretty cool, I think. Good thing for human dignity and individual liberty, which these things are a thing I'm a bit of a fan of. The Court of Justice of the European Union sided with Mirzarafi Ahi, a transgender man who sued his home country of Romania for refusing to accept the name and gender identity changes he initiated in Britain when it was still a member of the EU. The court agreed that Romania violated his rights to citizenship and free movement by refusing to update his Romanian identity documents. Quote, gender, like a first name, is a fundamental element of a personal identity, the court said in a news release accompanying its ruling. A divergence between identities resulting from such a refusal of recognition creates difficulties for a person in proving his or her identity, or their, I will amend, in daily life, as well as serious professional, administrative, or private inconvenience. Mir Zarafi told the Washington Post that the ruling, quote, is really quite amazing. The 32-year-old who lives in Cambridge, England, and works as a science tutor is hopeful he can return to Romania with new identity documents. His legal team hopes the ruling will make it easier for other transgender people to travel freely and work or study in EU member states. Except an LGBTQ rights advocacy group in Romania that helped with this case said there are, quote, tens of thousands of people in similar situations. The ease of obtaining a gender recognition certificate varies widely within the EU. Some countries, including Belgium, Ireland, and Spain, permit people to self-declare. It's a big thing the UK does not like. Other countries, such as Cyprus, Latvia, and Slovakia, require sterilization or surgical interventions, quite literally just torture in many instances. Like, you shouldn't need to be sterilized in order to change your gender identity. Even if you want surgical interventions like bottom surgery or whatever, it shouldn't be a requirement, because then that might influence people who aren't entirely sure if they want those surgical interventions to get them, and that could lead to some of the few actual regrettable, instances of those surgeries happening, even though they have a regret rate that are less than hip replacements and so on and so forth. If, a person's able to actually come to the conclusion that they want them without any kind of undue pressure. Bulgaria and Hungary, meanwhile, don't allow legal changes to gender identity at all. In socially conservative Romania, the process is relatively difficult. In 2021, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that Romania had violated the privacy rights of two transgender people when a judge refused on the grounds that they did not furnish proof that they had undergone surgery. Yes, this is also why Andrew Tate was living in Romania, because he understood that he would be able to engage in his alleged, he was convicted, I don't remember, sex trafficking organization activities, because he suspected Romania would be more lax, and it seems like they have been a little bit. Moved to the United Kingdom with his parents in 2008, became a British citizen in 2016, the year of the Brexit referendum, unfortunate timing, and received a gender recognition certificate 4 years later when Britain was on its way out. But Romania refused his request to update his Romanian passport, which he said effectively restricted his travel. Freedom of movement is one of the key pillars of the EU, allowing citizens to live and work anywhere in the bloc. For any of you Americoids out there, the way that the EU operates is kind of like how individual states in the United States operate, where if you are a citizen of, say, Tennessee, you have freedom of movement to be able to go to Idaho, for instance, if you want to take a road trip or whatever, or if you work in another state, you're able to do that without any hassle, really. You have freedom of movement within the United States of America, so long as you're there, quote, legally. There's a variety of different things that disallow or make it more difficult for people that are working on getting their citizenship or are undocumented in the United States of America, because the US lacks a easy pathway to citizenship for people. Generally speaking, you have freedom of movement in the United States of America and its individual states. EU states kind of work the same way. You can go from Germany to Belgium and you're big chillin'. Super easy. And easier than you can go to different states in the US, because a lot of those countries are connected via trains and pretty decent public transport systems. You can also drive if you want, though. I think that cars are still legal to own and operate in the EU. Maybe not for long. Mirza Rafiei called an incident in 2018 where he traveled to Romania and was grilled by Border Patrol authorities because he looked different from the photo in his Romanian passport. He described a, quote, intimidating and uncomfortable conversation that included questions about what surgeries he might undergo as well as his genitals. No business of the state. Call me crazy, the state should not give a fuck what genitals I have, and I should not be asked about what genitals I have at any moment ever, okay? Maybe that would be relevant if I was like a porn star, but I don't think the state should be involved in that either, frankly, in regards to worrying about that. I think you can have regulation on those kinds of things, especially strengthening protections for sex workers that operate within those fields. If you're worried about any kind of untoward things happening in the adult entertainment industry, it's a lot harder for those things to happen if you actually have good regulations on it instead of, all out banning it, like the current Republican and conservative ideological movement wants to do, in spite of the fact that there are millions of Republicans who are addicted to pornography. Definitely don't inquire about what category they seem to prefer. Starts with a C, I think. Not that one, though you're not that far off either. Quote, whatever that was, it started inappropriately curious, but ended up completely invasive and offensive. I just wanted it to be over, he said. He was also denied a new birth certificate and identity card, which Romanians need for everyday interactions such as using public transportation, going to the bank, or picking up the mail, which makes public life very difficult, and therefore is a form of discrimination that should not exist, right? Because at that point, you are essentially implementing conditions for living so oppositional to the ability to actually live and be a productive member of society that it would probably lead to this person having to leave or, cease to exist, I suppose. The court acknowledged that the status of a person's gender identity is a matter that should be handled by national authorities, but it emphasized that national decisions must comply with EU laws, especially the, quote, freedom conferred on all Union citizens to move and reside within the territory of the member states. The court added that the fact that Britain is no longer part of the EU does not affect the application of the bloc's law. Quote, it goes to the issue of competence, meaning does the EU have the power to have any say over these things, said Catherine Barnard, an expert on EU law at the University of Cambridge. It's like in the States. Is it a state issue or a federal issue? When it comes to anything that gets in the way of free movement, then the EU has the power. The case is being made by people that understand EU law that the UK should not be exempt from this either, even though they are not part of the Union anymore. Unless they want to, I guess, close off their border and restrict freedom of movement for anybody going in or out, which would probably be devastating to their economy, much less, you know, the people that exist within the country or outside of it. Who cares about those people? You know, it's about the money. Rulings by the European Court of Justice are binding and affect millions of people across the bloc, but implementation can be difficult to enforce. In 2018, the court ruled in favor of Adrian Coman, a gay man from Romania who fought for the right to have his American husband, Cly Hamilton, live with him in Romania. The couple had been married in Brussels, where same-sex marriages are permitted, and where Coman worked as an EU official. But authorities in Romania, where same-sex marriage is barred, did not recognize their marriage. Sound familiar? With the fact that the Supreme Court might be going after the case that allowed for gay marriage, is it Obergefell versus Hodges? That makes it so that anybody who gets a marriage certificate in a gay marriage in the whatever state in the United States of America, say, I don't know, New Jersey, where gay marriage is legal, the states that don't allow for those kinds of marriages to happen in their borders, like I would imagine Alabama, still have to respect the fact that that gay marriage is legal and valid, and all benefits to that couple having that marriage certificate should be rendered to them by the state of, in our example, Alabama, right? The fact that a conservative activist Supreme Court that is essentially there to rule from the bench instead of actually like objectively interrogate the letter of the law and find out how the shit actually works, they're just there to make sure that even if anything good, any law that actually helps the American people in any way whatsoever makes it through the House and the Senate, and also the executive branch gets signed into law, the Supreme Court's there to strike it down, say it's unconstitutional because of reasons, and, you know, make it so that all the hard work that went into trying to make the world a better place, or this country a better place for people, goes into the shitter, because that's anathema, that's antithetical to the conservative project. The entire reason for the conservative project is to make it so that the wealthy get more wealth off of your hard work, your labor, the exploitation of you as a worker, as somebody who doesn't have more money than God like they do, and to make it so that your taxpayer dollars go to help them, you know, give them a bigger wallet than they already have. The way that it's being explained here is essentially how Republicans want it to work in the States. They want to make it so that if you live in Tennessee, where same-sex marriage is not legal, you cannot then go to, say, New Jersey, get married there, and then bring it back and have it be valid. They want it so that it would not be valid, and you do not get any of the benefits of being married under the law. Just another thing that the Republican Party and the conservative ideological movement in this country really idolize about authoritarian regimes like Vladimir Putin's Russia or Viktor Orban's Hungary. The court acknowledged that EU residency rights are awarded to spouses and that, quote, spouse was gender neutral. The Coman case has been used in courts by same-sex married couples to win residency rights, including Bulgaria, but Romania has yet to grant Hamilton residency rights. The same residence could follow Friday's ruling. But even if it does, quote, trans and intersex people in similar situations in other EU countries will in any event be able to use Friday's judgment in their own cases, said Marie-Helene Ludwig, Senior Strategic Litigation Officer at ILGA Europe, an advocacy group for LGBTQ+ people. Mirza Rafiei said he is looking forward to using his updated identity documents in Romania and, quote, just walking in and not being asked, quote, are you a tourist? How long are you staying? Who are you seeing? What your genitals look like? Which way does it bend? When you tuck it to hide it, do you put it up or down? And so on and so forth. All the important things that the state really needs to know about your personal identity and your actual body. Yeah, do your balls hang low? Do you got long nuts, or do they kind of hide in there? So it's going to take likely legal challenges from the UK and the government in power, which is currently Labour, who are very transphobic, and obviously any more conservative government option there. The fuck, they're called the Conservatives. The Tories, their little pet name. Also the fucking dickheads that Nigel Farage is the leader of, or whatever. I forget what they're called. Doesn't really matter. It's a fucking joke country anyway. Just kidding. Love you guys. Anybody anybody out in the UK, bruv. It's all bants, mate. It's just bants. The UK is likely going to have to deal with legal challenges to any of the transphobic shit that the Labour government or any other government want to do, like in the instance of the video we spoke about earlier, EHRC guidelines that, if made into law, would essentially make existing as a trans person in public incredibly uncomfortable, to the point where it's going to be difficult for them to, you know, live life like the average productive member of society, and would therefore make them less likely to be in public, which is kind of the goal for that being implemented, right? There's historical precedent for things like this happening when it comes to the powers that be in whatever country not wanting to see as many of a certain demographic. You just institute a variety of laws that make it so that being that demographic is as hard as possible, and your feelings get saved for having to, you know, suffer bearing witness to trans person in this instance. With this, they're going to have a little bit of difficulty. Hopefully the EU is be able to throw its weight around in spite of the UK making the regrettable choice of leaving the EU, and you know, it'll throw its weight around and help out the people that will be impacted by this by the current government. In the UK, I think the comfort you experience being visually trans public depends on your location. Thankfully, I live in a very progressive city. Yeah, it's going to be like that anywhere, even if there are very strong laws put in place to codify protections for trans or gender nonconforming people. But obviously, the worse the erosion of those protections get, or the outright institutions of laws that are hostile to those demographics, the worse it's going to get in not only progressive areas that might try to fight against it, but especially those that are already not progressive to begin with. A lot of these kinds of changes tend to act kind of like a catalyst for vigilantes going out and trying to quote-unquote enforce the law on their own, and anybody they suspect of being trans, they end up, you know, getting verbally assaulted, physically assaulted, sexually assaulted in many instances, sometimes even murdered. That's also a, you would think, unfortunate byproduct to those kinds of laws being instituted, but often it's the case that the people that actually want the institution of that oppression to be codified into law to begin with also don't particularly mind that the people that they are decreeing are second-class citizens are also being treated as such by other people that don't fall into that demographic, right? That kind of vigilante action is actually, in most cases, a benefit to the regime because it allows for a climate of fear that keeps more of these people out of the public. Also, can we just say, I kind of popped off when it came to shitter.jpg. I'm a big fan of this guy in particular. He's just doing his own thing. He's making his way, whistling a little ditty. And we got somebody here with a longer hair who you might expect not to be masculine, but could be. Washing their hands. I even got a little reflection in the mirror. A Mogish trash can was not my intention. You also got a person on their phone in the shitter. Classic. You probably whistle something like,